Okay, so I might just quickly start again. So the accuracy, reliability and speed at which you can get your data has become a major factor for companies to get a competitive edge over their competition in emerging markets. With today's distributed world, there's always pressure to ensure your data can be consolidated and effectively understood so that information can be used for strategic decision making. Some of the areas organizations can focus on to ensure they are managing data effectively include data integrity, compatibility, data governance, and security. With a wide range of high volume, high velocity data, organizations need to focus on managing and protecting it by introducing a system of truth. A typical organization will have at least one or many ancillary systems that are required to manage their business operations. Without a system of record, these ancillary systems will be engineered into silos, delivering a suboptimal solution, where each system can have a different underlying data set. So it's critical that the ERP system and overlaying data management and analytics tool is compatible, capable, and brings with it best of breed to an organization so it can support a company's requirements now and in the future. Too often, at Aptus, we've seen organizations install solutions that are tactical for a specific need and soon realize they had a much wider range that they needed to use it for. Without the technology compatibility, being agnostic, you'll find yourself with a mess across your business and across your data. So organizations need to balance the need to make data readily available and accessible with a robust security and governance infrastructure. So I hope that is a quick overview of a little bit about what we're talking about today. So on that note, which I hope was informative for you, I'd like to pass over to Bill and Trevor, who will show you the importance of data governance and automation for access to information across your business.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be going through a few PowerPoints just to set the scene here about what the market's about and what's happening out there. And then we're going to talk about how we can assist you in the big part of this presentation, which is really around data management and automation. So to start with, let's look at what the market's telling us. This is an insight from Forbes, and it's relatively recent, but very accurate to what we're trying to achieve. I mean, information really is vital today in this fast-paced environment in which we all work in. Data is critical and is becoming the new currency as regards information that you want to disseminate to your business. If you look here, you can see the top 4 priorities, and BI analytics and line of business applications such as ERP are way up there as importance, almost as well as much as the network and connectivity. And that's no coincidence, because if you think about it, the amount of data we can now access points towards the fact that we do need improved networks, etc., as well as the security aspects around that. So we've often seen this is becoming more and more critical to our customers. This will enable you, if you do this correctly, to get that consistently accurate data that you need in an automated way. It's quite interesting. Some of the stats out there is, we spend an awful lot of time analysing data or collecting data rather than analysing data. So, for example, 3 weeks out of every 4 can be spent just trying to pull data together, and that's a lot of time and effort being used by your staff to actually bring that information. More importantly, there's a huge risk involved here, because more than 7% of employees accessing data they shouldn't have access to. This is normally done unintentionally by people passing around information in spreadsheets and emails, etc., and can expose an organisation to high amount of risk as regards security. And because of these things, you're missing the opportunity. You do not have the data that you need to actually make an informed decision. Or you might have the data, but you don't quite trust it because it's being pulled together by many different sources. And this is manifested in the way that in 2020, there'll be 40 trillion gigabytes of data out there, and that will double every 2 years. So if you think about the scale of that and the information that small to medium businesses now even have at their disposal, it's becoming more and more important that you can contain that fire hydrant of water and make it into a ability to be able to drink a glass of water from it, not just blast it everywhere. So we're seeing quite a lot of the move towards not just the reporting and the graphics and the visualizations, but how do we manage that data and automate that data as we go through. So ever increasing data in the modern world, and this is just elaborating that slide there. Here are just some of the data sources that you might be accessing. Obviously, there's Sage out there. You could have a payroll system, in-house bespoke systems. I know some of Joe's customers have add-on systems to their Sage solution. And we can bring all that information together in a managed and controlled environment, which is quite key. Also, remember that data is being driven by Internet of Things as well. Trevor's getting keen. Big data, cloud, all of these sources are now readily available to small to medium businesses, where traditionally that was the remit of the large enterprise. So it's quite important that we understand that. So let's look at a traditional solution. If you, and this is the data friend or foe piece. So if you think about it, many people have been installed or implemented standalone stovepipe solutions to be able to access data from a single source. I think gone are the days now where you have a single source of data. Data can be manifested in many different ways. But what typically happened was people would buy a system, implement it, build some reports, pull data out, and then they perhaps pass it around to their friends in the sales organization or support or consulting or whatever it might be, via spreadsheets and email, which means we're moving to an ungoverned data model, which is very risky in today's environment. So if you think about it, we have many, many point-to-point implementations of data at the moment, which is quite a bowl of spaghetti when you think about if you've got a number of systems, how do you glue those together in a way that you can trust the data? And that's always been the biggest issue, is how can I automate that process, not just visualize the data that I think I've got at the top. We all have the classics, and we will show you this in the presentation, of 6 people coming to a meeting with their own reports and spreadsheets, and it's a debate about which data is accurate. We now need to move beyond that as we go forward. So this leads to a number of things. So bad data goes to incorrect analysis, invalid insights, therefore uninformed and wrong decisions, and therefore poor outcomes. So we're being very simplistic in that approach there, but that is traditionally why data can be a foe, because it will cost you an awful lot of time and money and resource to actually ensure the integrity of that data without a tool set that actually manages it for you. So data can be your biggest friend and most important ally, or it can certainly be a very dangerous foe out there if it's giving you the wrong information as you go forward. And that leads into 4 key areas that cause risk because of that build. So security, as we've talked about, that becomes inherent risk because people are accessing data through many different means that they shouldn't be. Legislation is now vital. If we work in the healthcare industry or the banking industry, we've got to ensure the integrity of the data and the security of that data. Taking 3 weeks to build an analysis data is not good for the business, because by the time you've got the data, the business has moved on or the markets have moved on. And then also what you have is these data silos within your organization, and how do you bring that together in a meaningful way? So the way we approach it is with a friend we call data management and automation. So we can bring data in from many, many different sources, and we have smart data sources as well as generic data sources. For example, we have models built for Sage 300, for Sage X3, Sage 500, etc., and payroll that we can actually preload and therefore save you a lot of time. We bring that data together in that automated manner so that you can ensure that you can trust that data and it truly is your friend. Then we can actually help you disseminate that information to the correct organizations via the security models that we build into our solution for you. So you can ensure that people are looking at data that they should only be looking at. So with that, I've set the scene there about data governance and security and automation. I'd now like to pass over to my colleague Trevor, who will demonstrate some examples of how we help manage that requirement. Trevor, over to you. Joe, you might need to unmute Trevor.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, thanks. Good morning everyone. Thanks Bill, thanks Joe. So what I'd like to do is just I start this conversation because we have a world full of visualizations. You can get pretty much reporting and visualization tools anywhere and everywhere we look. There's visualizations, and I think the message I'd like to get through in these conversations is it's not always about the visualization, but it is always about the numbers. And so it's important that we have the right numbers and getting the data from the right places, and we manage that accordingly. So the solution we're showing you today is focused and really has its roots in being an enterprise management platform. It's not a visualization or reporting tool first and foremost. It's more a management for your data, for your analytics, and bringing all of that data into one place where you can then control and govern it. So if we step through that process and we have a look, we start with the collection of data, and we can collect data, as Bill mentioned, from most sources available today, whether they be in your applications like Sage X3 or 300, whether they be in shared file shares like SharePoint, things like that, or whether they sit in a database or even in the cloud. We can combine all of that information, collect it all, and bring it into this environment. And that's a very simple process. We do that as a wizard-driven approach, and we take the technical complications away. From a data modeling perspective, as Bill mentioned, we have what we call smart solutions, where we've pre-built a number of solutions for specific applications. So things like Sage 300, 500, X3, etc., and others, where we've gone and mapped all of the data sources, all of the tables, all of the columns in those applications. And we've also built a warehouse data model to hold that data. And we've built some analysis cubes from that to allow us to generate reports and dashboards from it for you. So all of that as a smart model is delivered to you, and it represents several hundred hours of work and man hours that we've done to build that for you, and taken away what traditionally would be anywhere from 12 to 18 months worth of project work. But not only that, we've invested significantly, and this is why I mentioned the data management platform piece. A lot of our R&D of late has been in the data modeling and in the automation piece, which we'll talk about next, whereby once you've got your model, your base model, whether it be X3, for example, we then make it really simple because of the data modeling functionality that we have. It's really flexible and allows you to then go and add other supplementary data sources, whether you have a separate bespoke billing system or an HR system or a payroll system. You can bring that data in very, very easily through, almost a point and click environment, and drag and drop those things in, and it will merge that into your data model in the warehouse, and it will be available for reporting immediately. Looking at the data warehouse, as I've mentioned, we've spent money on automation, significantly on our automation algorithms. And what that allows us to do is when you do build your model, your initial model, when you then start to bring in new data sources, our algorithms will go in and do the heavy lifting for you. It will go and check to see if that data coming in matches any data already in the model. So, for example, if you're bringing in sales data, does it match sales data, and do a lot of that mapping for you. If it's new data, it will suggest ways of including it into the model. And really what you end up with is the only real manual intervention is where you only have to manage the exceptions, where either we can't find it or we have multiple ways of resolving the solution. And through a series of prompts and a step-by-step process, you can then integrate that new data very, very quickly. And of course, none of us like looking at computer speak, when a column is DOB_1 or, things like that. We'd rather look at things that make sense. So we include the semantic layer. We go into those applications. We pull out where they're available, any tags or any semantics that's available. So that DOB becomes date of birth, dollars becomes revenue, and things like that to make it more intuitive and more useful to people when they sit down and look at this data. And we'll do all of that for you. And then finally, as I've mentioned, we do the analytics. So what you get with our smart solutions goes all the way from the data to the dashboard. So we provide you your dashboards from visualizations. If anyone out there doesn't have a visualization tool, by all means, the Xap Analytics will stand up next to anything that's available on the market today. But if you do have investments in things like Power BI or Tableau or anything else, or Qlik, we are an open standards platform. So those will very quickly plug in, and you'll be able to leverage all of the work that's been done with whichever tool you choose. On top of all of that, data governance is critical these days. We've all heard about the data breaches. We know there are people out there that are constantly trying to get into our systems. And we need to make sure as well internally that we've got governance over how our data is used. And so data governance is a smaller part of that larger governance and risk process that we all know. But clearly we provide a platform that has the technology to support whichever governance process you have in place. So we'll automate the collection of logs, we'll automate control and audit of activity happening within the system, and we'll make it a very simple process for you to be able to report on that, to monitor activity, and to be able to govern what sort of data is brought in and how it's accessed. So let's very quickly a background on why I like to focus in on the fact that this is a data management platform as opposed to a visualization tool, and that's because much of the demo that we do in these revolves around visualization. So if you could just bear in mind the context of what we're doing rather than why. All right, so here's a dashboard visualization from one of our smart solutions for Sage X3. These are web-based applications. There's no software installation required, and you can access it from wherever you are on whichever device you're using. We're looking at the CFO dashboard. So immediately that implies that our dashboards are role-based, and we provide a suite of dashboards and reports for chief financial, for sales, for procurement, for inventory, lots of different roles. We have a whole bunch of dashboards for those. But key to that is the data. And what we've done is we've built out over 300 different measures specifically suited to these roles. So things like cost of goods sold, net sales, gross margin, daily sales outstanding, all of those calculations are being done for you as part of loading the data warehouse and the cubes. We're doing all of those calculations for you, and then obviously at a customer level you would go in and you would fine tune those to suit your business, but you're talking about an exercise of days rather than months to do that. So this dashboard is to give an example. It's probably a bit too busy for daily use, but to give an example of the sorts of visualizations available in the Xap Analytics, but also most importantly the breadth of data that we can deliver to you with our smart solutions out of the box. Also across the top here, you'll notice that we have what we call slices, and it generally means that while we have interactivity with some of these reports, so I can hover over here and I can see the underlying data, I can drill down and do things like that, but I can also have a bit of a conversation. So if I'm a CFO for a group, I can break this down by different companies. It's going to ask me to sorry, it's been taking too long to get here. I need to refresh this page. It's going to sleep on me. All right, so I might look at company and I can see all of the companies that we might have available. And if I look at sort of NA10, I can now refresh and review this exactly the same report, only just for a different view, which is for a particular company. So very quickly, I can do managing by exception. I can look at different product groups. I can look at ledger types. If you're multi-currency, we support multi-currency. We can even go down into chart codes. So you can start to have a dynamic conversation with the data over and above just what we represent here. So you can do things as well where I can say, all right, well, let's drill down. So I can double click, let's have a look at what happened in that month. As you'd expect, we can drill down into the lower month breakdown. I can also, and here's where it's interesting, rather than having to click around and move around, from here as a CFO, I can move directly into an income statement dashboard, for example, and I can start to navigate around the content I'm used to navigating around. So in this example, you'll see we've now got a dashboard with some more complicated types of reports, financial type reports, etc. And these are also dynamic. So they, I can now drill down into things like cost of goods sold and have a look at the underlying transactions that make up that number. And all the while, it's bringing along the context that I start with. If I choose a company, it will bring that context along with me, so I'm staying within that context and doing true management by exception. At this point, as you know, everybody likes, no matter what we do with these managed environments, everybody somehow wants to get into Excel. So we can export to CSV or Excel, we can print a PDF, keep all of those people happy. So just to summarize here, essentially what we've done is we've gone out and we've built a whole bunch of calculations and measures, and you'll see that for this role in particular, we've got 5 of what we call at-a-glance cards that we've created around performance, around activity, profitability, liquidity, and leverage. And we can now, so as when the CFO sits down with his cup of coffee in the morning, at a glance, he can see where the business is at, and get a snapshot of how it's tracking, and from there have a discussion in more detail with some of these other reports that are below. More importantly, as Bill mentioned, it's quite often the case when we start sharing data around in an ad hoc fashion that when we then get asked to go to meetings and sit down with some stakeholders, that each of those stakeholders have their own analysts or people responsible for looking after the data, and they all end up with their own versions of these calculations, and we sit down and argue about whose number's most accurate rather than making a decision based on that data. So a key benefit of having a centralized managed environment is we now can share that data based on, obviously, on security profiles, per the governance. But now the CFO might say, well, look, I just want to go across and have a look at my sales data. So just by a single click, I'm now looking at exactly the same dashboard that the salesperson was looking at. So we're no longer arguing. This is now the gold standard of data. We've all agreed that these calculations are what we want them to be, and we now use the same data. So now by simply drilling across as the CFO, I can now have a look at exactly the same picture that the VP of Sales is looking at. And you'll see here, again, different representations. And again, I can have that conversation using my slices. As part of this day in the life story, I'd like to just, the CFO is sort of sitting here looking at this dashboard and saying, listen, we're having a bit of a focus on our costs at the moment. They're not where we'd like them to be. And I think it'd be a good idea if we could edit this dashboard and just have the sales guy, the VP of Sales, every morning when he logs in to his dashboard, that we actually have a report on here that looks at costs, and he can have it as, on his dashboard, front of mind every morning. So he has that conversation with the VP of Sales, quite happy to do that. CFO sticks his head out of the door and says to his analyst, listen, could you do this report around costs and add it to the VP of Sales dashboard? So we'll change hats now and we'll have a look at how that is done. So to this point, this view here is what we call our consumer mode. This is where we've published this content into effectively production, and we can now consume this data. In order to generate new content, we move into what we call the designer mode. And so we'll have a look at designer mode, where this is traditionally where you're slightly more analytical people who understand this data and understand how to join this data and create reports would come and start creating new content. So I'll start with up here, and we'll look at a new, or sorry, actually we might just describe this here. So for the people responsible for creating content, we also, on their homepage, we provide them a bunch of links to things like BI fundamentals, how to develop data models in ZAP, some slightly more intermediate and advanced topics. We have some on-demand videos that they can follow. We have tips and tricks. And we also give them access to the documentation, knowledge base, get involved with the community, access customer support, and get into some more advanced training materials just from this single portal and their starting homepage. We provide them with the access to that so that it's as easy as possible for them to do what's asked of them. So in that, we look at analysis report. We'd like to create a new analysis report. If I select that, I then connect to my data warehouse, my model, and you'll notice now on the left here, I have measures, the things we count, and I have all of my dimensions, the things that we look at those counts by, so customer, by date, by etc., by country. So you'll notice here, and I'll just bring this to your attention because I'll show you again in a second, that this list of dimensions, these ones here, that list is quite lengthy and goes over multiple pages. You see it's quite a lot there. If I choose, for example, a measure and drag that into my report, And I'll look at sales invoice, and I'll look at my costs. And if I drag that into my columns, you'll notice now that this dimension list no longer goes even over one page. And this is the enforcement of governance at play. So what we've done is we've done two things. Firstly, obviously everything within the measures and in the dimensions is controlled by security profiles, and we can extract those directly from your application, your X3 application, for example, and implement that for you. But then from a governance point of view, you can then overlay that with a further layer of security. So this is doing two things. It's looking at what am I allowed to see, but also it's saying once I select something, these are the dimensions that relate to that and really are the only ones that would make any sense to combine with cost amount. So we're preventing users from creating runaway reports or crazy reports that don't make sense, or using data that looks like it's the right data but actually is not the right data. So this is governance. We can apply that, and obviously to different levels of degrees you can change how that's configured. So we'll take cost amount, and then what I'll do is I will add date. And we support multiple calendars. We support calendar to calendar, we support fiscal calendars, and we support multiple fiscal calendars, whether whichever day of the year they start, and different weekly components such as 545, etc. We support all of those calendars. In this case, I'll look at my date, just my regular calendar, and we've built a whole bunch of time functions in automatically for you. So now we can look at some very clever stuff. So we'll look at relative time, we'll look at current period, and say, right, show me the current month. I'll pull that into the rows, and now I'm looking at June. Now, because of the fact that we've built out all of these time dimensions, I can actually now very easily say, actually, you know what, I would like to see this as a rolling 6-month report. So what I have now is a rolling 6-month. Obviously, as we move into July, then January will drop off and the numbers will update automatically, and there's nothing further that I need to do to this report structure. But as it's put on a dashboard, it will just automatically update based on the date that changes. All right, so let's make this a little bit interesting. So if I take cost amount and drag it over, then I can say, right, again, I want to look at some time. I'd like to look at period to date again, but I'd like to look at it for last year. So let's grab last year's month to date. So now we're looking at a report over 6 months against the current month's cost amount against the same month last year. As simply as just dragging it out on the page. Now let's get add a bit more value, and we'll create a custom formula. So let's do what most people would want, which is the variance. And what we can do using our expression builder, if I hover over here, is I can say, give me the cost amount and subtract last year's cost amount. And now I have my variance. And I can go a step further, and I can actually go and say, right, let's do that again, but this time I'd like to see the variance percentage. So now I can take that last month and divide that by the cost amount and apply that, and I now have my percentage. Although it's not actually represented that way, so anyone who's used Excel should be quite comfortable. We're just going in and formatting the number to a percentage, and we now have that represented as a percentage. What I might do as well is neaten these up, turn these into a number, and I'll just remove the decimal points. All right. So as easy as that, we've now produced that report in just a number of clicks, which traditionally for people would, take a fair amount of time and fetching data and multiple queries. Now, because this is going on a dashboard, for an executive, they probably like pictures more traditionally, so we'll make this a picture. So what I'm going to do is I'll drop off my variance. And now my percentage has disappeared, clearly because as a number, it just does not fit on this scale. So to fix that, I can select my variance and look at my chart, and I can add a new axis for that. And now we have a new axis. What I might also do is change it to a spline. And now we have our report built where we have this month against last month with our variance plotted as a spline. Now, things that I can also do, if I choose to on my table, is I could do things like show me for the variance anywhere that we have a number greater than 100%. So we want to see every time a number exceeds 100%. And I can obviously format that. So I might change this to be, show me with that with a red background and a white font. So now in my report, everything that has over 100% variance is now traffic lighted to be red. Makes it a lot easier for people glancing at this report or looking at this report to manage exceptions and notice exceptions. So we can do traffic lighting, and we can do multiples here for each column. We can apply that to multiple columns. We can get quite sophisticated with the sorts of traffic lighting that we can do. All right, so I might put this on the dashboard now. So let's remove the table and I'll save this. Now to save, I can save into, I have a private library where it's just for me, or I have a public library. So I can actually, we can set up for organizations a shared repository of reports, not dashboards, but reports and individual reports that others then can access and customize for their purposes. So that means that this report development actually becomes very quick and very rapid because other people have built and you have a shared library, and you can suddenly go in and make a couple of tweaks to suit your own reporting requirement for your department. In this case, I'm just going to store it in my private library, and I'll call it cost report. And we'll save that away. And if I have a look at my Resource Explorer now, my cost report is here. So how do I get this on a dashboard? So, and actually while I'm here, what I might do with this is just move my legend down here. So that's a little bit neater. All right, so now what I do is I go into my public environment, which is essentially production, and I go and find the sales dashboard that I'm trying to add this to, which is the VP of Sales dashboard. So I can open up that piece of content, shows me how it's built and how it's designed, and put that into design mode. And now all I need to do is drag my report into the dashboard. There it is. And now I can take these and just make them nice and equalized, and I can save that dashboard. And now if I move into consumer view again and look at the VP of Sales dashboard, my report is now sitting there ready for use. So the next time he logs in, that report will be ready for him. So that's a very quick demonstration of how easy it is to create traditional reports, dashboard reports, and then add them to a dashboard. There are also other types of reports I know a lot of us have been involved in. You might have monthly or weekly, for example, a weekly sales meeting every Monday, where everybody comes together to discuss, what we're going to do and what happened last week. So what you can do then is generate pre-built content and just have it automatically mailed out every Monday morning at 8 o'clock. A certain set of reports get sent out to all of those stakeholders so that we're all, again, coming in with the same piece of information. And we do that by creating a new report pack, and we can start to add different components and different reports and different items from the content that we've created to this point into a formatted report, much more high fidelity and much more, and you can add text for narration, etc. So if I look, for example, at the header, and I go into edit mode, you can see here that I get traditional Word formatting type of things, left alignment, formatting, fonts, etc., etc. I can do all sorts of background colors. I can insert my text and images, but then I can also go in and add elements from other resources. I can add images, etc. So I can start dragging in reports and content from my calculations. So this becomes not just a static document, it becomes a little bit more dynamic, where I can add things like when this was run. I can start adding actual data elements into and amongst all of the text that I use, that I create. So then attached to that header, I also create a dashboard. So I've created a little dashboard that I'd like to include in this pack, which is essentially these 6 reports, and I'd like this to be page 2. And I've dragged that out of some of the content that already exists in my reports. When I save those 2 and look at a print of that. This is the report that at whatever time you specify, let's say 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, this will automatically generate and then email out to all of the stakeholders for the meeting, and they can print it or bring it in on their laptops or tablets. And we now have a standard way of looking at information. And there's no arguments about whose number is right. So that was one that we schedule on a time basis. Did we have others, for example, where this is one I built earlier, which is based on a trigger. So if you look at triggers around low margin, so for example, this one we've said if the margin calculation drops below for margin drops below a certain threshold, then we'd like this report to be generated. And we'd like this report to contain these 4 items: the CFO dashboard, a couple of reports, the P&L, and an aging accounts payable report. And then we've built this out, so now we have our CFO dashboard, we have our gross margin, income statement, and accounts payable. And that report, as soon as that threshold is breached, that is then sent out to all of the stakeholders that we want to have that information, and obviously calls will be generated and we can all get on and discuss this. And obviously the key here being a data management environment, these triggers can be generated across multiple source systems. So as mentioned earlier, if you have, for example, a billing system that's not part of your core model, we can generate a billing threshold that compares against, for example, an X3 threshold. And we can check across multiple systems by virtue of the fact that we're bringing all of this data into a centralized place, and we can now start saying, compare these things from all these multiple systems, and on the basis of all of that, let's decide whether we need to trigger an event. And these can get quite complicated. So we've seen ones here where we can get text involved, and you'll see that all of these 400,000 units and these 19,000 units and the dollar values, those are all actual text data values from our system. So every time this report is run for that month, these numbers will update within this text, and likewise these reports will update. So you can get very sophisticated with these, in building out these board reports. For example, this is a board report that you'd send out every quarter, for example. So that's, I guess, where I wanted to finish the demo. Sorry, so just to summarize, our environment is optimized for, we have what we call smart solutions, and those smart solutions include Sage, Microsoft Dynamics, and Salesforce. We've built all of the data to dashboards for you, and it's a simple matter of reducing what would typically be a 12 to 18-month project down to a number of, anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks for a non-customized solution to be ready. So yeah, at the end of that, I think I'll hand that back to Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. Thanks, very, very informative. So what we've shown you today is a little snippet into how you can actually get the benefits of all that data coming in, but controlling it and governing it, and giving you the comfort and trust that the data you're looking at is actually accurate and timely. So I believe we might have some questions, so I'll open the floor to Joe and he can pose those questions.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks very much. So I've had a couple of questions during the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them in now to your chat and we can go through them. First question is it possible to drill down into Sage from EMDA?
Yes, so the answer is yes and sort of. So depending on what flavour of Sage you have, depends whether the technology is supported to enable HTML5 to drill through. So if you have X3, you can actually embed the actual zapping screens and dashboards directly into the X3 model. You can also drill down from within Zap into the X3 EMDA screens if you configure them to have them that way. With regards to 300, we can drill into the detailed transactions that we bring into the data warehouse. So we can still expose the detail, but it doesn't, because the technology enables us to open a 300 screen.
Great, thanks, Bill. I do have another couple here, just 1 second, here we are. Can I get information from Excel as one of the data sets? So I get information from Sage in my spreadsheet.
Yeah, and this is very common. We use Excel as a data sheet, certainly for budgets and lots of things like that, also for mapping tables. So yes, you can have as many Excel data sources as you need, and they can be brought into the data model.
Great, thanks. Another one here. How often does the data refresh?
Well, that's dependent on your requirement. Typically, most people refresh data overnight. But for example, at month end, they might want to refresh the GL data every 15 minutes as they're doing their close and they're adding journals. So you can actually specify parts of the model to be refreshed quicker. So you can set the times and the automation to refresh at whatever is the most convenient for you as a business.
Great. Thank you. Now, are there any other questions from anyone at all? I might just unmute everybody because let's see if there's any other questions. So does anyone have any other questions? No, looks like everybody is good. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. I hope you found it informative and it was helpful to you and your business. I'd like to thank Bill and Trevor again for their time today. It was a great informative session. Every time I see the product, it is fantastic. So now I will let everyone go, and thank you again. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me, joe@aptusbusiness.com.au, and I can answer any of your questions. All right, thank you very much.